thank you for joining me again today for the Finding Hope After Loss podcast. October is drawing to a close, which means that Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month is almost over. But just because the month is over doesn't mean that you have to stop talking about your baby or raising awareness for loss-related issues. We can talk about our baby every day. You don't need a special month, and you don't need permission to do it. Say their names, share your stories. Do what feels right for you whenever it feels right for you. And if you are ever interested in being a guest and sharing your story on the show, you can always reach out to me at Sarah, S-A-R-A-H, at journeyforjasmine.com, or you can send me a message on my Instagram or Facebook. And I am also working on building up my TikTok and YouTube if you want to go and join over there. All of the social media is all under Journey for Jasmine. So today I am talking with Nicole. She has gone through the loss of 7 different babies throughout her journey to become a mother. She adopted 2 girls and has written a book about her entire experience called The 7 Birthstones. Today, she is sharing her story with us. Hello, everyone. Today, I am here with Nicole. Nicole, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, yes. So I live in London, in the UK. I'm actually half Swiss, and my mum lives out over there. So I speak French fluently. And I have 2 jobs at the moment. So I have a day job, which is change management. And I'm also a therapist. And I see clients in the evenings, which keeps me pretty busy. But I love it. So the second job is my love, what I love doing. And the first job is the one that pays the bills. With the hope that at some point I might be able to transition kind of full time, but at the moment that's not the case. And what can I tell you? I'm 47. I live with my partner, my 2 girls, a dog and a cat. And yeah, life is busy, but it's fun. I love gardening. I love reading. I haven't done so much of it recently, but I do love reading. And yeah, I think that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Yeah, you definitely sound really busy. So can you talk a little bit about your loss journey?
Yeah, so it's quite a long story. So sit back and get comfortable. So it all started really. I met somebody very very young. We were at university together, and I saw the trajectory of my life. We were going to get married and have children, and it was all going to be just peachy. And then I wanted children quite soon after university. I realized I really just wanted to be a mum. I'd always wanted to be a young mum because my mum had had me quite late. And then my dad died when I was 25, and that really just pushed me into I want a family of my own. And he wasn't there. So we kind of tried to. I thought, I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna, it'll happen. It'll be all right. Just calm yourself down. And we got to a point where, yeah, we just weren't on the same page, and we split up. At the time, yeah, I was heartbroken. I wasn't there. I thought surely if we love each other, then you stay together, but that's not how it works. And then I assumed that I would find somebody pretty soon afterwards, and that didn't happen. And I ended up being single for 9 years during so I was 29 when we split up. For another 9 years, I was single. And in that time, I did everything I thought I could. I was going dating. I was on websites. If anyone said, "Oh, I've got a friend," I'd be like, "Yep, I'll meet him." I was really very proactive about it, with a view that I was desperate to have children. But I also didn't want to just settle for somebody. I wanted our story to be a worthwhile kind of love story, not just, well, you'll do as a dad kind of thing. So I was still kind of looking for the one. But yeah, countless dates, and it just wasn't happening. So I decided to have a plan B, assuming the whole time that it wouldn't be required. And I started looking into solo parenting. I thought about adoption, but my mum then started getting ill, and I just wanted to have that biological link, and maybe be able to see my mum and dad in my children. So then I started looking into sperm donors and going down the IVF route, which I did do. And as soon as we started medical investigations, I was diagnosed with stage 4 endometriosis, and I had quite extensive growth. So I had to have surgery. And then obviously there's recovery time, and one of my ovaries had been just too damaged by the endometriosis. So when I finally got to start IVF, yeah, there was only one ovary that was responding, and even that one waited until the 11th hour. It just wasn't responding. The consultant was like, well, we might have to just stop this cycle because it's not happening. And then suddenly, yeah, the 11th hour, the ovary kind of kicked in, and I think we got 3 eggs out of that, and then only 1 fertilized. So there was only the one option, and I actually got pregnant, which yeah, it felt like everything that I'd been through had kind of been worth it, and I was going to have this baby. And then unfortunately I lost him. I say him, I felt it was a him. I have no idea. And yeah, I was devastated, but I was also still hopeful, because I knew that people could have miscarriages, and I thought, well, at least my body can get pregnant, and next time it'll know what it's doing. That was the mindset I had at the time. So I was actually not kind of negative about it. I was sad, but I thought, next time is going to be the time. I went through another round. They upped the dose of the drugs to see if I would respond better. And the next round failed completely. And the consultant said, you're never going to carry a child of your own. Having done no further tests, having just undergone the transplantation of the egg. So yeah, I was suddenly just in this space where actually that pregnancy I'd lost was likely to be my only ever pregnancy, and it suddenly took on a whole much bigger meaning. And yeah, and the grief I felt having been told you're not going to carry a child. And then during my second round, I had actually met somebody, and bless him, he did stay when I told him I'm doing IVF, by the way. I had expected him to run away, but he didn't. And we started. Well, initially I was grief stricken, and I actually saw a counsellor and talked through the fact that I wouldn't carry my own child. And then it kind of dawned on me that he said you probably wouldn't, and I was like, well, where's the harm? So we did start trying, and I got pregnant really quickly. And yeah, so I was really hopeful, and I was like, well, this time, it happened naturally. We love each other. This one's it. Lost that one as well. Got pregnant within a month, so really quickly again, and then lost that one. And then nothing happened for ages. And by now, I was 39, I think, and because of my age and the fact that nothing happened for a long time after that, we were recommended to go down the IVF route again. I weirdly got pregnant just before we started IVF, lost that one really soon. And then we did IVF. I was pregnant with twins. I lost one twin. And then a few weeks later, we had another scan, and there was no heartbeats at all. So I lost the second twin. And I was told we couldn't use donor eggs. They weren't willing to try anything else because I was just going to lose every pregnancy. I had been a patient at the Recurrent pregnancy clinic, and they couldn't find a reason. And yeah, basically it felt like I would be kind of sacrificing any future child, I think. And initially I didn't want to believe it, and we kind of went away and weren't really trying. But then weren't not trying. And I got pregnant again 9 months later and lost that one again. So we lost 7 babies. And at that point, I was like, I can't, I just couldn't keep. And it all happened fairly quickly. And I think just the compounded loss after loss after loss. Yeah, I just thought I can't keep putting myself through this. So then we knew that we had to look at another option. We initially started looking at surrogacy, and there's quite strict laws around that. You can't ask anybody. You have to kind of go to social events, meet surrogates. They have to pick you, and offer to carry a child for you. And at the time, I was broken, and just, I was struggling to be sociable with people who knew me. The thought of going to a social and being smiley and being, oh, pick me, I'm really great to be around. I wasn't great to be around. I was a mess. I was, at the point where I was thinking, is this actually ever going to happen for me? Yeah, the idea that I had to sell myself, I just wasn't in that place. And then the finances, there's quite there's, even though it's you don't pay for the surrogacy per se, you do pay for I can't remember the word now, sorry, brain fog. Joys of the menopause. You pay for like costs and things like that people encounter, which is absolutely fair. It's a massive thing to do for somebody. But having spent all that money on the IVF as well, yeah, the money wasn't kind of there wasn't masses of it. So yeah, we were just, I didn't feel like it was for us. And then we started looking into adoption. But yeah, it took a while, I think, to accept that. Probably more so for my partner. I think I had got to a point where I was just like, enough. My body's been through enough. My heart has been through enough. I think he would probably have carried on trying, given half a chance. But yeah, so we decided to pursue adoption. And yeah, that's kind of how we came to finding our girls. The adoption process is a whole different process. Yeah, it's not an easy one as well, but yeah.
Yeah, you definitely have been through a lot. And I don't know how anybody who is trying to go the surrogacy route, could just sit there and, like you said, like sell themselves, like pick me. Like that seems like not a great way to go about that process.
No. And I mean, maybe it would have been slightly different once you'd been there and got into the social kind of groups and met people. It might not have been, I'm sure people would have been very understanding of where we were coming from, but from the outside, when you're reading about what's involved, it just felt too big, too much at that point. And again, I think my age was a constant kind of almost like a devil on my shoulder saying, come on, come on, come on. I'd always wanted to be a young mum, and yeah, I lost my last baby when I was 42. And I was like, how old am I actually going to be if we keep pursuing it? And then, because obviously for me then, miscarriage was actually the obvious result of pregnancy. So I would be like, well, if a surrogate gets pregnant, she might miscarry. We don't know. So at what point do you say, stop?
Right.
And that was such a difficult decision, because I think once you want that biological child with such intensity, it's so the hardest decision to just walk away from that. I think.
Yeah, I imagine it has a whole other layer of grief that comes from that, on top of the losses, on top of everything else, is the not being able to have a biological child when that's what you wanted.
Yeah, yes. And even though, so I'm a mum now, I still find pregnancy hard. I still find seeing bumps hard. I still find seeing scans hard. I think I feel like I've missed a huge part of who I wanted to be. I was going to say who I was meant to be, but no, who I wanted to be and who I thought I would be. Um, and I think I've always been, I did biology at uni, and I've always seen it quite biologically. This is what my body was meant to do. So I think there was a lot of a sense of failure and yeah, having not achieved my point.
And I guess you feel probably like you got kind of cheated out of the whole experience, right? That you wanted to have
Yeah,
the
yeah,
pregnancy and the birth and, everything that, like you said, that you
goes with
always
it.
hoped that you would have.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Um,
oh, go ahead.
no, no.
I was gonna say, so are there any particular things that helped you with your grief?
So there's quite a few. So I found writing very, very good. And actually, I've always kind of written quite a lot anyway. And I started when I was initially looking at being a solo mum, I started writing a diary for my child, so they could see how I felt and what I was kind of thinking about and researching, so they would know that I hadn't just gone into this because it felt like I might be being quite selfish, like it's all about me, and I wanted them to know that I had actually kind of considered what it would be like for them. um, and I would kind of gather articles and things I'd read, and I'd wrote all this in the diary, and I'd write about all the things that we would do. um, and then the diary could just kind of grew. So every time I was pregnant, I would write in there to my baby, and then I'd lose that baby, and then I'd strangely then start writing to the next baby. Um, and yeah, it just kind of became my outlet, my pouring of my dreams that I didn't dare believe in, really. And then after I lost our last baby, I thought I can't be the only one. I felt so alone because yeah, I knew that some people had lost one baby. I'd never met anyone who'd lost seven. Um, and I'd never met anyone who'd done solo IVF. I just hadn't. Yeah, there's so many of the scenarios that I just um didn't know anyone else in that position. And I'd found books, but generally they're written from the point of view of, you've got your rainbow, you've had your happy ending. This is my story to how I got there. So I could relate to the start of the story, and then suddenly there'd be the happy ending, and I'd be like, I have no idea if that will be me. So yeah, I stopped buying those books because it was just that I couldn't relate to the happy ending. Um, so I then wrote my book, The Seven Birthstones, from the diary, and that kind of formed the kind of underlying story, and then I wrote kind of my story around that. Um, yeah, and it's kind of a mid infertility book. There is no happy ending. There's no. So I do kind of towards the end, I do talk about the fact that we're thinking about adoption, but we haven't started the process. There's no kind of guarantees. It's not a happy ending book. It's a grief book, really, and a love book to my babies, I think.
I love that you started it, as a diary to your babies. I think that's so special, and that you were able to create that, into a relatable book, because there's so many people that, even though we're taught that the narrative is like, you lose your baby, you get pregnant again, you have your rainbow, everything's great, and that just doesn't happen for a lot of people. And
Mm,
you're right, there isn't that many books about that. So I love
yeah.
that you were able to contribute that. Now
Yes.
on Instagram, and because I know you're on Instagram, have you found other people that are similar to your story?
I have, and it's I'm always a little bit wary of social media. Used to on my personal accounts, I never used to post very much, and yeah, then I started an account really to kind of talk about my book. But actually, in doing so, I found so many people who've been through similar. I think there's no two people who've been through the same. I think everyone's story is slightly different, and I think that's kind of the beauty in it. But there's a whole community of people who get it, and it's so lovely. And I've found actually different groups, and I found lots of people who were childless not by choice, and they actually really helped as well. That community really helped because at one point, when the adoption process was taking a really long time, I was in my mid-40s by then. I was like, am I ever going to be, or should we just call it quits? And they gave me a lot of support in terms of, there is life after, it's not the end. And it made me feel a little bit less desperate in terms of starting to consider that actually motherhood might not happen. Whereas before I met that community, I was just like, it's not an option, and I cannot live if it doesn't happen. It was very kind of, yeah, that was the only option. And it's so lovely to meet people who've actually had to make that, or sometimes not make the choice as such. Life has happened that that choice has been made. And to know that actually you can be okay. And yes, there is the grief, but I mean, I'm a mum now, and I still have the grief of the pregnancy and the bumps and the scans. So I think infertility as a whole is a grief that doesn't really leave you, like any grief. It's something that you learn to carry, learn that you kind of, life grows around it, but it remains.
I definitely agree with that. I mean, even now, like, I do have living children, and I still get, I don't know, weird feelings when I see people who like get pregnant so easily, or, they've never been through loss, they've never been through infertility. And I'm like, man, like, I don't like wish that on them, but I wish that could have been me, I think is
Yes,
more,
yes.
I wish that was my experience, not all of
Yeah,
this stuff.
yeah. I know when you meet kind of younger people and they're like, oh, we're gonna get married next summer and then hopefully have our first baby the year after, and I'm like, what? Is that how it works?
Like, I
um
wish.
yeah.
So you
Yeah.
mentioned that, oh, sorry, were you going to say something else?
No, no, no.
Okay. I was just going to say, you mentioned that the adoption process took a while. Was that a complicated thing to go through, or?
um so no, so I think they've done a lot of work here in the UK to shorten the process. And so it actually, in theory, takes 6 months from kind of starting to finish. And it's split into two stages. You have the first stage where you do a lot of learning. You go to training courses about parenting traumatized children and things like that. The thing in the UK with adoption is it's very rarely a relinquished child. It's usually a child that comes from a family where for one reason or another they weren't able to keep the child safe, and give the child the care it needs. So yeah, there's usually a level of other than just the mere separation trauma, but there's usually a level of either neglect or some form of abuse, that has led to that child being up for adoption. So you do a lot of learning. You have to evidence the background reading and things that you've done. And then the second stage two, it's called, a weekly meeting with your social worker, and they come and they discuss. So in the first stage, you've written almost like a comprehensive biography of who you are, the relationships you've had, and then the social worker kind of dissects that with you, and says, this is the relationship you had with your parents. How do you think you would translate that into parenting? And kind of quite an in-depth, it's almost counselling, but with a social worker. And it's quite intense. I think because I'm a counsellor, I'm quite used to that level of emotional intensity. So I was fine with it, but I know that some people do find it very intrusive almost. And it can be quite hard. I think for us it took longer because after, well, firstly, when we first were allocated a social worker and she heard our story, she felt we were not ready to adopt. And actually said, you know, you need to wait a few months. You're still grieving. We at the time we were like, no, we're fine. And they actually recommended a counsellor that we go to. And he kind of confirmed that, you know, we would be fine to keep going. But also at the same time, we'd started to do some building works on the house. And we weren't allowed to finish the second stage until the house was completed. And then COVID struck and the builders had to stop for a bit. And then because of all sorts of various things that were happening at the time, prices of everything went up. Cement and things like that just went through the roof. So the build just slowed right down. So that kind of delayed us again. So it took a lot longer than we'd hoped. And then when we finished the process and we were approved, we had been led to believe that the matching would happen really quickly. And then we ended up having to wait at least, well, just over a year to be matched with our girls. So again, more waiting. So yeah, it ended up being very slow.
Yeah, COVID ruined a lot of things.
Yeah.
Yes. Definitely slowed everything down.
Yes.
But I'm definitely glad that you were able to, you know, get through the process and that you have your girls now.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm sure that was an adjustment period as well once they came home with you.
Yeah. So yeah, we had a period of 2 weeks where we progressively saw them more and more. We went to their foster home and spent time with them, and then yeah, brought them home. And it was quite overwhelming, to be honest. I think that's probably the biggest word I can say. And yeah, I think because they were grieving the foster family that they'd absolutely adored. They'd also had to say their final farewells to their birth family, which is a huge thing. Our eldest was 6 at the time, so she was obviously very aware of everything that was going on. So there was a lot of grief, and I know that our youngest one, you know, took to us. She was happy, she was smiley, she took to us as carers, but it took a long time for it to become affection. She was just like, you know, yeah, you're fine to kind of look after me, but that was kind of where it stopped. But I guess having been through so many changes already, yeah, why would she believe that we're not just transitory as well? So I think it's taken a long time for them to get a sense of permanence of us.
That makes sense. So I guess in the UK, are there not a lot of young babies that are up for adoption? Is it mostly older kids then, or?
So there's not kind of generally not brand new babies. So they generally, if it's deemed that they are not safe with their birth mum, then they go into foster care. There is a new system that we have, well, new, it's probably several years old now, but fairly new, that is foster to adopt, where you become the foster carer for that baby, because there's several kind of steps to go through before the court. I think it has to be 6 months. I'm not 100% certain, don't quote me on this, but it has to be about 6 months before a court will say this child definitely needs to be up for adoption, because the system here tries to make sure that the birth parents have had every opportunity to change and learn and make the changes necessary. So you have to be a foster parent to that baby for the first few months, and if actually the judges decide it's still not safe, then they are up for adoption. And if you've done foster to adopt, you are then the adoptive parents, once you've been through that process. Which I guess for the baby is good because there's a permanence there. They've had the same person, as opposed to going into a foster family and then finding an adoptive family. But there is always the risk that the baby would go back to the birth family. And so we did look into that as an option. And I, at the time, was just, I can't face losing another baby, even if the risks are very low, because it's usually a pretty much guaranteed. Generally, it's people who've potentially lost previous children because they weren't able to keep them safe. So yeah, but most children who are adopted in the UK are, I would say, over a year old.
I was just curious about that. I think, you know,
Yeah,
there's some similarities in, I think, the US and the UK system, but also some big differences. So,
yeah.
and that definitely sounds like a lot for your girls to have gone through, to have to say bye to the birth family and the foster family. And that's a lot for them. I mean,
It's massive. And I always say, you know, our family was founded in grief, but in a good way, in a positive way. You know, I think we understand each other. We're in a place where, you know, no one's kind of come into this as it being, you know, I think my girls had they, if they had a choice, you know, would want to for their family to have been able to look after them. You know, it's there's a lot of grief around it. And there's a lot of having to accept that grief. You know, there's always going to be another family, but there is so much love and so much joy, that it makes it worth it. It does, but it takes a while, and I think that's the thing that you are not necessarily prepared for during the process, is that it takes a long time. Potentially more so the older the child is. But just to get that sense of feeling settled, feeling safe, everyone kind of being calm, and the love as well. It's not always instant. It can just take time to build.
yeah, I bet it's, you know, it's an adjustment for everybody. And it's
Yeah,
probably, you know, you might expect it to be one way, but it turns out it's a different way. But then you just adjust and, you know, you just keep adjusting.
yeah, yes.
So I was
Sorry,
just
carry
going to
on.
say, why? I was just going to say, why do you think it's important to share your story and talk about your story?
Um, I think because I felt so alone. I think, and I felt I just didn't know where to turn to not necessarily find advice, but just feel heard, feel that, you know, someone understood what I had been through. I mean, my family and friends are wonderful, and they all love me very much, but they didn't understand. They couldn't understand, I think. And it just makes you feel very isolated and very alone. Um, and I'm sure that there's hundreds of other people out there, who feel exactly the same. And I thought, if I so for instance, my book, it was the book that I wanted to have read, a book that, you know, isn't finishing with a happy ending necessarily, but actually shows that you can kind of come through grief. And adoption as well. I think there's a lot of stories about adoption, and it kind of sells it as a happy ever after, but actually, you know, adoption does not cure infertility. And I think that people are surprised that I have my girls, but I'm still sad that, my baby's died, that I can't carry a baby. That hasn't gone away. And I think unless people speak about it, it becomes something shameful, and something that you feel like, oh, I shouldn't be feeling this. There is no shouldn't around grief and loss. It's, you know, how you feel is how you feel. And I think it's, in part, I want to share because I want to normalize that actually every kind of range of emotions is possible and is okay.
So when you were going through your losses, did anyone ever, give you that comment? Oh, you could just adopt. Did you ever hear that from anybody?
I did. Yeah, I did. And I mean, I had actually thought about adoption when I was single, so it actually wasn't kind of a an alien thing for me or something. But it's just, as I say, it doesn't cure it. It doesn't cure infertility. So yes, I'm no longer childless, and I love being a mum, and my home is just so normal now. I walk in and there's toys everywhere, there's coats, there's socks on the floor, there's noise, there's mayhem. It's everything that I dreamt that motherhood would be. Um, but yeah, I'm still infertile. I still, the the pain doesn't just disappear. Um, and it's very different. And not everyone can adopt. So certainly in the UK, you have to be approved. You have to be. I mean, they are quite good in terms of what they accept. You don't have to be super rich or be able to just be a stay-at-home mum or anything like that. They accept that life happens, and you might be renting, you don't own your own home, you might need to work, you might need to do this, that. And you can adopt as a single person in the UK. I know other countries you can't. So it's quite good, but some people still are not able to because of health issues or whatever. There's many reasons why you might not be able to. But also as a relationship, the other partner might not have been willing to. So adoption isn't just a, a surefire means of, that's it, you get your family and it's all over. That's not how it works.
Yeah, I've heard no one actually ever said that to me, but I've heard like a lot of people have had that. And I think people just kind of carelessly throw that around because they don't
Yeah.
really understand that it's not just, I mean, you want the baby, you want the child, but that's not like the only thing, that
No,
you're after.
absolutely. Yeah. And it's not the only grief that you have as part of it. Yeah, definitely. And also, to be fair, they can adopt.
Yes.
It usually comes from someone who's already got their family, and they're like, "Oh, just adopt." It's like, well,
Like, all
you
right, you go
adopt.
ahead. If there's that
Yeah,
many out there, you go do it.
exactly. It's not kind of because you're infertile that you should adopt kind of thing. It's um yeah, it's a thing that anyone can do.
Now,
Yeah.
I'm not as familiar. In the UK, do you have to pay for your own fertility treatments, or do they cover any of that for you?
Oh, that's contentious. So some people do get it on the NHS, and it depends. It depends where you live. It depends how old you are. Um, and some areas give you one round for free, and then you have to pay. Some give you two. I think some might give you three, but I'm not sure. But again, it depends on your age. But unfortunately, I fell out of the scale either end. So first couple of times, I had to pay because I was single, and my where I live, they don't give you NHS treatment for if you're single. And then when I did it with my partner, I was over 40, so I didn't get it either that time. So yeah, it depends.
Yeah, that doesn't seem really fair, does it? It's a
No. But yeah, it's I think there's a lot of campaigns trying to look at how it can be improved and made fairer. Um, but yeah, it shouldn't be dependent on where you live, and yeah, certainly your social status. The age, I don't know. I don't think it should be either. I don't know if that's because the chances reduced, but surely then you need more help anyway. So yeah, I'm not sure where that kind of line comes from. But I think even the government guidelines say up to the age of 42. So after that, you're on your own anyway. So regardless of where you live.
I always wonder who comes up with these. Like, they seem arbitrary sometimes. Like, who set like that as the cutoff?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'd like to be a fly on the wall in that particular meeting. Let's just go for that.
Definitely. I always
Yeah.
wonder too, like if it was a bunch of men that decided or if women had any say in it, you know. I always
It
just
feels
wonder
like
that.
it's a masculine decision, doesn't it?
It does. So, is there anything else that you would like to share or add?
Um, I think my biggest learning from all of this is to find community, find people who understand, because I think certainly with baby loss, I think the fact that so few people could really understand my grief, and actually a lot of people were quite dismissive, not necessarily in a mean way, just in a didn't know what to say, wanted me to feel better, so thought, if they G me up, then everything will be all right. Um, so it's not necessarily from a bad place, but I think it can feel well. Actually, even the medical teams I worked with were quite dismissive of each loss, um, and not actually taking into the consideration that actually it's not just this one loss, but it's the last one and the last one and the last one, and the dread that actually it's never going to happen. It all just compounds into such a huge loss. There's just so many things that could make it slightly easier. Like for instance, when you go into it, so the recurrent miscarriage clinic was in a section of a hospital where they deal with all gynecological things, including pregnancy. So you can sit in a room with heavily pregnant women who, can't find a babysitter, so they've come in with their baby and their massive belly, and you've just been told, there's no heartbeat, you've lost your sixth baby, and then you have to go back into the waiting room to wait to see the consultant. Just things like that. There's no sensitivity around it, and around the massive loss that it actually is. So yeah, find community, find people who get it, because you need that. Your soul needs that. You need to know that your feelings are valid, and that everything you feel and are going through, things like feelings of jealousy when you see someone that's pregnant. Everyone, I used to feel so dreadful. I'm like, what kind of horrible person am I, that I can't bear looking at this woman? She's just annoying me. I can't be near her. But actually that's so normal, and it's not actually jealousy in a bad way as such. It's actually just part of your grief. It's not that you wish her any harm. It's that actually you are in such a horrible place about this subject that you don't want to be around it. um and just no one seems to understand that, and people will be like, oh, just ignore it, and I'll be like, well, I can't. um so yeah, I think, yeah, find community, find people who get it.
If people were interested in reading your book, where could they find more information about that or buy that?
So it's self-published, so it's available on Amazon. um yeah, and it's called The Seven Birthstones.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story with us today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been lovely.
Thank you so much, Nicole, for sharing your story with us. I'm so glad that you wrote your book about your experience to help others who are going through recurrent pregnancy loss. You mentioned that you knew others who had gone through loss, but never others who had gone through as many losses as you. Recurrent loss is more common than people think. And though it does get some attention, I feel like it's yet another issue related to loss that really needs to be in the spotlight more. Going through one loss is incredibly hard, but going through loss after loss after loss is just indescribable. and there needs to be support and resources for these women. They don't need to be told the losses are just flukes or continued bad luck. And at the same time, I think doctors need to be willing to do more testing, especially in these cases. There shouldn't be the stupid 3-loss rule in order to get additional testing and help. And yes, there are some doctors that will do it sooner, but other people seem to get the runaround when they're trying to get more testing or more information on what could be causing their losses. Hearing about experiences like these is so important to help others know they aren't alone and aren't the only ones dealing with recurrent loss. It can feel isolating when you keep having them, yet everyone around you has had either no losses or even just one loss and then had their living child. There's loneliness there even amongst the loss community because recurrent loss makes it harder to believe you will ever bring a living baby home. So continue sharing your stories if you're comfortable. Sharing our experiences is the only way we can start to bring about change. And if your story helps just one person not feel so alone, I feel like it was worth it to share. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. If you like the show, please leave a rating on Apple or Spotify. Thank you so much for tuning in, and remember, we are all in this together.